Here?
Mr. Kane?
Not here.
He will be out, okay, hold on.
Yeah, he's leaving.
Wolverton? Mr. Wolverton?
Here.
Mr. Wyatt?
Here.
And Ms. Andrews?
Here.
Got 4 present. So, 4.
All right, thank you. Can I get a motion for dispense and reading and approval of the minutes from the meeting of October 12th?
Motion.
From Mr. Wolverton, second.
Second.
By Ms. Andrus. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that passes 4-0. Thank you. 170620, request for consideration to form a joint task force of community and Homewood Police Department leadership to evaluate current policies concerning use of force and other related matters and make recommendations as needed, coming to us from Councilor Mike Higginbotham. Earlier in the week, last week, I sent an email out to everybody that was included on the original I guess, group, committee, whatever you want to call it, and explain to them with the upcoming changeover in council and mayor and council liaison and everything else that we were going to put this on hold for the time being, and that there were going to be some changes that would happen once that's done. So for now, I would request that we table this until we can get the new council and mayor and everybody in place, and then get the new task force and everybody assigned. And I've heard from most everybody that was there, and some people had some suggestions, but overall I think everybody was in agreement with it. So that's where we are with that.
Second.
I have a motion to table from Councilor Wyatt, second by Councilor Andrus. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is 4-0. Thank you. 110820, request for consideration for additional street lighting and address traffic concerns in Forest Brook Drive and Still Delchrist. Councilor Wolverton and Randy Hambley.
Randy's not here. I know, I guess it was last week we doubled up, didn't we?
Mhm.
So last week, Randy had indicated that he's reached out to Alabama Power, but just didn't have a timeline yet due to their response and thinning of their staff. So we're just going to carry this over for tonight.
Okay. So we will carry it over. Is he hopeful that he's going to, I mean, we've carried this over for a while. I'm just curious whether or not he is hopeful he's going to hear from Alabama Power.
Yeah, so part of the reason, Brandon, I guess I'd be open to tabling it as well. The reason why we were carrying it was just to get a timeline firmed up. And if you remember, this item was going to remain for a little while as we continue to look further in the areas also.
Sure. Mr. Squires, was that you? I'm sorry.
We've talked to, Randy's talked to the guys and them, and we're just waiting for them right now with COVID and everything.
Yeah.
There's certain crews that are kind of running behind.
Okay. Well, we'll carry it over. Okay. All right. Without objection, we'll carry that item over. 120820, request to address safety concerns at Hollywood and La Prado intersection. Councilors Andrus and Harden.
Yes, I spoke with Clark Bailey today, and he is still here, and I know that we've got some folks from the neighborhood. I recognize some family faces in the audience, some proponents of a stop sign and some opponents of a stop sign. So I'd love for everyone to, it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, to speak to their concerns, but also if Clark could sort of give the recap of what he told me today on the phone based on his conversations with Randy and looking at some of the accident reports.
Okay, Mr. Bailey, if you want to come up, and anybody that does want to speak to this, unfortunately, because we are in a COVID situation and we're not in our normal room where we just kind of let everybody freely talk, we're going to kind of treat this like a public hearing. So when you want to come talk, make sure you sign the list that's in front of Mr. Bailey right now, and then give your name and address for the record.
Yeah, so real quick, rehashing some of the stuff we talked about last week, looked at the intersection from a stop sign, always stop perspective. The volumes are low based on the guidance in the MUTCD for that. The pedestrian, I guess, activity and the ramps there at all the corners do kind of lean it towards, you know, a stop sign can help peds cross. The sight distance and the hill approach on the side streets of La Prado also lend towards, you know, it having some sort of stop control for the main line to help them get out. And so the missing piece last week was the crash data, and so Randy sent that over to me. And in the past 12 months, there was a total of 5 accident reports there at that intersection. About 3 of them had conflicts with returning vehicles impacted. One of them was the exact thing where somebody was crossing directly over from La Prado and was a direct right angle. Two of the others were people turning from Hollywood clearly fast and did not pay attention that there was a stopped vehicle on La Prado and were kind of sideswiping them there. So the gist is there's no engineering data or number that says you must put a stop sign in here. But also the different pieces in the context do lead it to it's justified that you can have a stop sign here, okay? So you can, you're welcome to put one in, but you can also don't have to put one in. And so I know that sounds a lot like me just kind of throwing it onto y'all. So I will make a couple recommendations. The first is you have pedestrian ramps at all 4 corners. I recommend you install crosswalks for all 4 approaches. And then one thing that Councilor Andrus talked about was installing the pedestrian pedestal signs like we have on Raleigh and putting those on Hollywood as well for the approaches to those crosswalks. That will not only help with the awareness to look for pedestrians, but it will also can impact in lower speeds just by having something there in the roadway. So I think regardless if you put a 4-way stop in or not, those things should be put in. I think the other thing that we talked about today was going ahead and having no parking for about 100 feet for each of the approaches, just to make sure there are no vehicles right there in the influence of the intersection and keep it open from a sight distance perspective, but also just a confusion perspective of which car's parked and which car's driving. So I don't know.
Real quick, is that,
Do you mean on the side streets?
Yeah, side streets and on Hollywood, I
And
think
on
would be a
Hollywood.
good, yeah.
Well-
I mean, of course on Hollywood, but
They don't park on Hollywood.
yeah, and nobody parks. Hopefully,
Yeah.
people aren't parking there.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Councilor Harden.
Mr. Chair, you know, I personally used to live over there, as the Pearsons know, and I know what it's like going up that hill when it's wet. So
Yep.
it's a wet problem mostly. And then there's leaves, and you're spinning out, and you're trying to get between these cars. And so I totally understand the issue. Is there a way for us to put something on that pavement to create a more,
Yeah.
a rougher pavement? I certainly think if we do nothing else, the minimum of that to make that pavement a little easier to get across, because I'm telling you, when it's wet, it's
Yeah,
especially.
no,
if you
there
don't have
are
great
abrasive
tires.
surface treatments, both topical ones, and then you can also like saw cut things, but I mean, I could send some just kind of spec information on those.
Okay.
And I'm happy to kind of stick around if people have questions.
I got one real quick before you go.
Councilor White.
You had mentioned last time that there was a possibility that if we put in the stop sign here, that the one at Poinciana might need to go away. Have you looked into that? Is that something, do we need to consider those things in conjunction, or is it matter one way or the other?
I don't think you have to look at Hollywood and La Prado. Nothing has to happen anywhere else for you to put a stop sign in there. But I will say, it makes sense to look at Hollywood holistically too, right? And so if I haven't looked at why there's a stop sign at Poinciana, for instance, or what's the other one, Malga?
No.
So, you know, if one of those is in there purely for speed control, it's not needed for a sight distance issue or a volume reason, and the biggest objection is that, well, there's instead of 2, there's 3 stop signs, you could consider moving it. I would do that delicately, though. Yeah, so.
Clark, a question? Purely from a traffic engineering standpoint, as I understand your recommendation, the stop sign's not warranted under typical statistical analysis. Isn't there a requirement that be more than a majority vote to approve a stop sign that's not otherwise warranted by your analysis?
Oh, a requirement for what?
Something more than majority required to approve a stop sign that's not warranted.
So the stop sign, and I'm going to use quotes, warrant, is very different from like a traffic signal warrant.
Right,
Because it's all guidance in the MUTC.
that's right.
Right? And so the guidance is that you can look at it from a volume perspective, a bicycle pedestrian perspective, a crash history perspective, or other context, right? And it said it should be justified with a study or engineering judgment.
Correct.
And so I think what I'm providing, and I think I'm answering your questions, is the engineering judgment that says that none of the factors I looked at say that there must be one there, and none of the factors I looked at say that there shouldn't be one there.
Well, it's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove a negative.
True.
Typically, from an engineering standpoint, you make a recommendation that's warranted or not warranted.
Mhm.
So is your recommendation it's warranted or?
So yeah, my recommendation is that it's justified and warranted.
Okay.
Yeah.
For those, I saw some hands in the back. For anybody that wanted to come up, please feel free.
Based on engineering judgment. Not required.
Walter, I was wrong when I told you earlier, there were 5 accidents within 12 months there. I was thinking there were 3, but he had told me 5, so I was wrong about that.
I also just wanted to let you know that there are people online when you get done with people in person that want to speak to this item.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
I had questions I wanted to ask that speaker, if that's possible. This is Claudia Pearson at the corner of La Prado and Hollywood.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Bailey's going to, okay, come on, come on, Clark. Sorry, we're all trying to figure out everybody being in different spaces. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Claudia
Ms. Peterson?
Yes.
Pearson.
Okay,
I live on the
Pearson, I'm
corner
sorry.
of Hollywood and La Prado, and I understand that he's done a measurement of the traffic. I wanted to just point out and ask if he had taken into consideration the fact that traffic is significantly different since last March with the changes in the school traffic patterns and the rules about drop-off and pickup at Shades Cahaba. In the afternoons, there were last year, all year long during the school year, a lot of traffic on La Prado trying to get out on Hollywood because they would have their kids walk from the school to La Prado, where they would be picked up by people waiting in cars. And then they would have to exit out of La Prado onto Hollywood. So there's significant traffic as a result of that. There's also traffic that exits the school and comes down through the neighborhood to La Prado to exit onto Hollywood. So there's egress from La Prado on the south side onto Hollywood that I don't think was measured in this, if it's done recently or any time since March, would not have been measured. But that's my big question.
Okay, yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, traffic patterns and volumes are different everywhere right now, and they have been. So a couple notes is the warrant guidance for stop sign, always stop. It looks at 8 continuous hours of traffic. But even within that and the volumes that were collected by Randy, they were still low by, I think, a factor of 2 or 3 to meet that threshold there. So I do understand how it feels on Hollywood that it's just this constant flow, but the overall total number is still below that threshold.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bailey. Sir, if you want to come up. Just make sure you state your name and your address, please.
I will. Try to make this quick. I've got the same game to get to as Brett just left to get to. My defense is about to take the field. So my name is Jeremy Forsyth. I live at 14 Hollywood Boulevard. I've lived there for a total of 12 years with my wife. Since we had moved in, I had a total of 3 boys that live there with me currently. But the point of me being here tonight is just to raise some awareness of what the reality is over the last 12 years, okay? We all know the issues, the speed in Hollywood. I know we've checked that out. You've got the data for that. But then we have the visibility of coming up the hill of La Prado, right? Which causes that split-second delayed reaction to try to get out into Hollywood. We know that. And then the incline of the approach that, Mr. Harden, you had mentioned is a struggle. I do want to bring up the fact that in my 12 years that I've resided at 14 Hollywood, that I've personally witnessed or been involved in over 30 accidents. Those include friends, family members, or within a year, our local postal worker that travels within that intersection on a daily basis. One incident involved the guy that maintains my yard. He was mowing the yard in the front, a car got involved in an accident, jumped the curb, and landed almost at my front door. Of those 30 accidents, you can imagine the number of near misses, right? And then we can equate near misses into accidents, which I have that data, into potentially there will be a fatality. So when we moved in 12 years ago, I can't really say that there was a whole lot of younger kids in the neighborhood. Maybe because I just didn't pay much attention to it. You know, coming in out of college, moving in, and not having kids myself. But as of today, as I walk my second-year-old to Chase Cahaba, I'm fully aware of the number of children before and after school that are walking in the area, and not only going to and from school, but through the weekends and through the weekdays in the afternoons of traveling throughout the neighborhood there. So it's a lot of activity within smaller, younger families as that's increased over the years. So my point being here is just wanted to raise that awareness and in hopes that one would recognize that there's a little bit of a shell shock to me, at least, to know that we've experienced that many accidents. Now, has a third of those been responded to? That's barely. Okay, and then but there's numerous long-term residents that's been involved. I mean, we have 6 families represented here tonight in the audience. And then the ones that's involved on the Zoom call, just shortly before the meeting, I totaled up over 200 years worth of residences within Hollywood there. So it's a major issue. We're all putting forth the effort to provide safety for the families and the children within the neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. Did anybody else want to come forward? Okay.
I would also like to announce, if you are online and you would like to speak to this item, go ahead and put your name in the chat, and please do not unmute until your name is called. Thank you.
So I'm Blake Pearson. I live on 9 Bonita Drive, and I just want to reiterate everything that Jeremy said and that my mother said, who lives on the corner of La Prado and Hollywood. It's very, very difficult, particularly when pulling from the north side out and turning left. About 2 weeks ago, I made what was probably a bad decision and went to the intersection during a heavy period of traffic where traffic was backed up all the way from 31 past La Prado. And when it's backed up that far, you have absolutely no sight distance to the right. Somebody let me forward, and it was just by pure grace that nobody plowed into me from the right, because you can't see anything coming that way. And people will be going, even if they're going just the speed limit, 25 miles an hour, and usually they're going 25 to 40 miles an hour. There's just no way that you can tell what is coming there. And it horrifies me that my 9-year-old rides his bike across that intersection on almost a daily basis.
All right, thank you, sir. Yeah, please come forward.
Good evening. At the risk of being redundant, I guess that's what we're doing tonight.
That's right.
I very much connect with everything Mr. Forsyth and Dr. Pearson said. The exact same story, both witnessing times where someone pulled out in front of me and by the grace of God was able to stop before there was contact, and also the same thing with the blind, lack of view, that same situation of trying to make it and then someone graciously stopping. So same issues, same thing with the kids, so thanks for your consideration. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, Trey Hill. I'm at 22 Ventura Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
I am Chad Hathorn. I am a Homewood resident of 9 years. Currently, I reside at Moretti Circle, 8 years previous on Ashley Road. And it sounds like to my other Homewoodians, I'm going to be the other guy. So I travel that road, 4 to 6 times a day. I'm either running that road, I'm riding a bicycle on that road, and I'm already annoyed at the other 2 stop signs that are there. All the time, and so we're going to put another one in less than a quarter-mile stretch. So I don't know if this one's warranted, if the others are needing to be removed. I have no data to support my opinion, but every time I'm downtown Homewood and I turn to go to Little Donkey and I go down Reese, boom, there's a dead end, a one-way road right there that I get frustrated with every time I try to go to Little Donkey, every time, because I can't remember that that's a one-way road, and it shouldn't be a one-way road, in my opinion. So with that, I don't think there needs to be a stop sign here either. I respect my fellow residents. This is in their backyard, but as my travel patterns go, I don't live right there at that intersection. It's a little hard for me to support it, but I'm not going anywhere. This is a first world problem for me. I got nothing else to do on a Monday night than to come here. If I don't hurry up and get home and cook my wife supper, I'm in bigger trouble. So with that, I appreciate what you guys do, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hathorn.
Chad, I think you and Blake just need to have a race, and whoever wins, that's how we decide.
Anybody else in the audience, or Brian, do we have anybody online?
We have one person, Mark Schaefer.
Okay, Mr. Schaefer?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing this virtually. Mark Schaefer, my wife and my almost 2-year-old daughter live here at 104 Hollywood Boulevard. And I know there was mention about a possibility of a crosswalk there. And what I would just warn against is that the crosswalk at the school will be disregarded or is disregarded without a police officer present. So if you do put in a crosswalk, my wife has stood in the middle of the crosswalk and watched cars zoom by her in either direction. So that's just one thing that I want the committee to understand, that is a possibility and something that we love taking walks, and we stand at the crosswalk at the school and watch multiple cars go by and just waiting for our chance to cross safely. And so just want to keep everybody is doing more walks and just having the ability to do that safely and not have issues there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer.
And so,
that's all. Okay.
sorry, no, one more. She just added her name, Kate Tipton.
Okay, Ms. Tipton?
You're muted, Ms. Tipton. Unmute yourself.
And
There you
Katie's
go.
on the corner. She's got the tree in her yard that we looked at the last time we were looking at this issue. Do you remember? So she's on the northeast corner.
Okay.
Right, Hollywood and Lafredo. And I would just echo my neighbor Jeremy's comments, much more articulate than I will be. But we've lived here since 2001, and I similarly have witnessed the aftermath of quite a few accidents, including several that hit that tree after being hit by a car in the intersection. I think the most dangerous thing is just the visibility for the people coming from the north side crossing Hollywood. The visibility across the street is very bad because of the slope of the hill, and you kind of get to this point where you've got to commit to pull out, and you can't see if there's a car across from you, and if there's a car across from you turning or whatever. And there's also limited visibility looking left at that corner toward Mountain Brook Village. And so you what happens most of the time is somebody think they have it in the clear and they move to pull out into the intersection. You kind of have to creep out there a little bit past the stop sign to begin with to even see. And then there's also, I know there's been accidents where somebody did like motion, like Mr. Harden was saying, like to come on out and it's, you know, and then sure enough, somebody's coming from the school, you know, side. So, and I also just wondered whether there was any counting or monitoring done of the pedestrian traffic in addition to the automobile traffic at the intersection, because it is, you know, I live right here, I'm out in the yard a lot and walking in the neighborhood, and people are constantly crossing that intersection from one side of the neighborhood to the other with strollers, with dogs. I see kids cross with bikes, 2 or even 1 alone. There's a little guy lately that I am so worried about because he's so careful, but he's little and he's crossing that street on his own with his bike, walking it across. And it's just a high pedestrian traffic location as well, not to mention all the kids going to and from school. So the last thing, also, obviously I support a 4-way stop. The reason, just for the record, that my understanding from living here and talking with neighbors who were here at the time, the reason for the stop sign further down the street is that a child on a bike was killed was hit by a car on Hollywood years ago, before there were any stop signs, and that's why those stop signs are there. That's the neighborhood lore. And finally, I just want to emphasize that it is a neighborhood, and there's so much back and forth between the two sides. We view ourselves as a neighborhood as a whole, and this intersection is a barrier to that, you know, goal of being close with each other across the two sides of the neighborhood. Kids being able to visit their friends, their grandparents, people being able to walk their dogs on a nice long walk, etc. So we would just like to preserve that and protect the people who use the intersection on foot as well as in their cars. And that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tipton. All right, committee members or other council members that are not on the committee?
Patrick, I'll say a couple words.
Yeah, Mr.
I've lived over there for a while, and this is a tough issue because we're talking about potentially, 3 stop signs on a much-traveled road between Homewood and Mountain Brook. Good to get people over to Homewood, good to get people, I suppose, over to Mountain Brook, and it will absolutely interfere. We do have traffic issues with regard to cars backing up all the way, already on that street. However, the pervasiveness of the problem at that intersection, I think, speaks for itself. And I appreciate the folks coming out to really underscore that. I mean, I've experienced and seen a number of accidents myself, and fortunately not my car, but helped people in accidents there. And I just think it does, it sort of gets on the side of truly erring on the side of public safety in the face of less efficiency. There may or may not be an issue with the other stop sign. I'm trying to remember the name of the road. Is that Poinciana? Thank you. Poinciana, because that street does not connect to another street on the other side. And there may or may not be some unique solutions, but regardless, we heard from our traffic engineer that we're in a position to add that stop sign and that public safety measure even without that consideration right now, based on the research that's been completed. And so I travel that road, gosh, just about as much as anyone on the council, I believe, because I live right off of it. And so, but I just think again, the pervasiveness of the public safety of that intersection warrants a stop sign.
There's part of me that would like to try the traction and the other measures to see how that would work, but just, you know, my opinion, and I'm not a member of the committee, so thank you for letting me speak to it, but I know we'll address it more at council if needed, but I do live there, and I just wanted to speak to that from my experience, and I just think it does err on the side of public safety, given what I've heard and what I've seen, and I think there's been a good demonstration of that, so thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Wolverton, and then Mr. Jones.
I just wanted to revisit the discussion from last time briefly about removing the one that's however many yards away. I know it was proffered and talked about last time. I didn't know if Clark had any thoughts on it. I'm not sure. I just wanted to make sure that it was vetted based on what other people had said.
I mean, we didn't study it. I would be uncomfortable removing that stop sign without further study. I would like to make this decision independent of that one because, first of all, as Katie pointed out, there was a depth there. That's why that stop sign was put there. And that's such a long stretch between Malaga and La Prado that I would be uncomfortable making. I don't want to trade one for the other.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I thought we were looking for a holistic solution here. We're getting into the emotional realm as opposed to the analytical realm, which clearly the amount of traffic does not warrant a stop sign at that intersection. I mean, that's clear. The rest of it seems anecdotal to me. I want us to, that's how we ended up with that other intersection, was because from an emotional standpoint, I don't know why we can't do something remedial while at the same time we do a study of the roadway to determine the best way to get traffic in and out of the school now, look at traffic patterns, come up, there might be some other recommendations, but with 3 stop signs in a row like that is not the answer, and I will not support that until we look at it as an entire solution and come up with what is the best way for traffic to flow through there in a safe manner. And I don't think we're there. I think we're just focused on this one intersection when the solution should be to look at all of that. And that's what we do with other projects. When we're looking at a stop sign, we always look at the other intersections to determine how is that going to affect. So those are my comments.
Well, I do want to say,
Ms. Anderson,
if it's okay, that I think before you had come back in the room, that Clark did say that it didn't discount a stop sign. In other words, we're in the same situation we were in last week. There were 5 accidents there in 12 months. So he wasn't saying there does not warrant a stop sign there. He did not say that. In fact, he did say,
Hold on a second. We got to be clear about this. Clark, the amount of traffic, and this is how, and Mr. Kendrick, will you help me out here? How we have always determined if we, and for a long time, a council would never vote for a stop sign unless it was warranted.
But I want to make sure.
I know, but I'm just saying, but for it to be warranted, it's got to be warranted for all scenarios, not just one. But you clearly said the amount of traffic, the volume does not warrant a stop sign.
Mr. Jones, the difference is if that's a flat intersection, I'm all over it, but it's not. It's this hill.
Okay.
And you got to sit at that hill, and you got to be someone sitting in that hill. I lived there 17 years.
I understand.
And I'm telling you, it has nothing to do with traffic. It has getting up that hill and getting across there or turning. That's the issue. It's not the amount of traffic. It's that there is traffic coming, and you got to either fly through there and hope it's not wet, or you got to try and get up that hill and turn left. If we want to flatten that out and go ahead and pour another road in there, I'm all over no stop sign. But it's the hill that's really the problem, not the amount of traffic.
Mr. Bailey, if you can clarify.
Yeah, so I'll clarify the warrant. And so I mentioned earlier, So traffic signals, like, we get into a lot of those analysis, has a very like clear analytical method for determining if a traffic signal is warranted, right? There's like 7 warrants, and there's one for 4 hours of traffic, 8 hours. A always stop or a multi-way stop, as the MUTCD calls it, it's not as empirically based. So it's all guidance, should statements, not shall statements. And there are multiple guidances for, and I feel like warrant is, well, sure, it's the right word, but there are multiple guidances of whether or not a multi-way stop is warranted. One of those guidances is traffic volumes, and the guidance is based on 8 hours of traffic counts, and this one does not meet that piece of guidance. But there's like 4 others that include crash history, that include pedestrian and bicycle activity, that include sight distance and other factors, and that include the context of the area and engineering judgment. And so based on those other 4 factors, my engineering opinion is that a multi-way stop is warranted at the intersection. And I think what I was trying to clarify earlier, because it's warranted, it's not required. Okay? But it is warranted, and I mean, yeah, my engineering opinion is for the safety of the pedestrians and to alleviate the crash history, that it does, when you look at that intersection by itself, I believe it makes sense to put a multi-way stop in. But I then will also say that going around and just dropping these in and not looking at holistic things is not the way to approach, a whole citywide traffic. But, yeah, so, I mean, but
you hadn't looked at all of.
No, I was not.
In that stretch.
Commissioned to study the whole stretch. So.
Okay, well, I hope we can do that.
Okay. Hold on one second. I'll do Mr. Gwaltney, then Mr. Wyatt, and then Mr. Wolverton. Okay? So Mr. Gwaltney.
So I just wanted to elaborate on that. You mentioned the traffic study. Did we follow the process which we just passed late last fall, the traffic calming document? Did we follow the process on this? And what recommendations did it spit out if it did?
Yeah, so the traffic calming is a process to address speeding and cut-through traffic.
But stop signs are a tool in that, correct?
Stop signs are actually, and I've harped up here before, or probably in that room, that stop signs should not be used to address speeding on a street.
But I believe they're in the document, aren't they?
Not to
They're
address
not?
speeding, no.
Okay.
They better not be.
Yeah, you created it, you should have.
So, I mean, and that's the first statement, if you pull up the MUTCD and this guidance on warranting it, is do not use stop signs for traffic calming.
Sure.
And so I think what we're addressing here is a potential safety issue and not.
Right, okay. I just wanted to make sure if
Yeah.
we're addressing a traffic issue, which it seems like it's both to me, but that we would have followed the process. But,
Yep.
So.
Mr. Wyatt.
So Clark, let me see if I'm understanding you correctly.
The lawyer to do that.
Well, maybe not. This is what I'm hearing. You tell me if I'm not hearing you correctly. This intersection presents a unique set of circumstances because of the way that the intersection is laid out, the hill, all of that stuff, that creates a safety issue that makes this warranted for those reasons, separate from traffic count, speeding, all of that stuff. Am I okay so far?
Yeah.
Okay. And that doesn't negate looking at the entire street to see if everything else, particularly if this goes in, what else is needed on that street to try to address the counterbalance to that issue, which is there's a lot of traffic that flows on that street.
Sure.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, this needs to go, in your opinion, this is warranted here because of these specific circumstances. It may be that once that's in place, that we need to look at what else is going on that road, because that may not be the case at some of these other intersections.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, so the question posed to me, is a stop sign warranted at the intersection?
Right.
So my answer is that one is warranted there.
And I understand you're
So
not
I
speaking
kinda
to
had
the
to-
other ones because you haven't looked at them yet.
And I think
but-
that's part of this. I had to study this in.
I understand, and I'm not trying to get you to answer to
Sure.
those other intersections. I guess what I'm saying is, to Mr. Jones' point of holistically reviewing the street.
Right.
There may be some need to do that after this to look at those other things, separate from putting this in or not putting this in. Sure.
Hold on one second. Mr. Wolverton. Oh, okay. Okay.
Is there a way to do that? Is there a way to do that before we, take the holistic approach now? Let's give Walter our report, a holistic report with the change and what, impact or other potential remedies could be available.
I will
Before
add
we
that
do it.
Mr. Clark, Mr. Bailey needs to be paid. I will add that. We have not
Okay,
determined
thank
how
you.
to pay him yet.
Okay. Are you done, Mr. Mr. Wolverton? And then Mr. Jones.
Sorry, was Peter looking for a response, though?
So, you can study the whole thing, yeah. It's just,
We can do that beforehand.
yes. It's just time, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Wolverton.
I just want to make one thing clear for the record real quick. I didn't earn the nickname Captain Crosswalk without reason. So I support crosswalks, I support safety, but I know that it seemed like it was almost proffered at our last meeting when we discussed it to look at the closest stop sign to this intersection. I can't remember the cross streets.
Poinciana.
Poinciana. Thank you. So I guess I was under the impression that when we were looking at this, we were looking at both. Obviously, that's not the case. Just to clarify, this roadway is not covered in the citywide traffic study. Is that correct?
It was not one of the specific.
It was not
Okay.
one of the specifics.
So I do feel like it's important to look at that, whether or not it warrants action now or later. I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't know the best way to do that study, if it's retroactive or after we go ahead if it's retroactive or prior to making the changes right now.
Which study?
Looking at Poinciana, where the other stop sign is. I'm not sure, to Peter's point, if you can do that effectively without the new change along Hollywood or not.
I think the two can exist kind of independently of each other. It was more of a recommendation that if you only want two stop signs, that you could look at that intersection to see, is it justified and warranted? I would be slow to remove stop signs
Agree.
too, because I think that it sounds like there
Correct.
was a lot. We can't study whether or not to put it in while it's already there. It's kind of like Mr. Kennedy proving a negative.
Right.
We also have 1,300 feet between Malaga, I think it's Malaga.
Malaga.
But if you took out Poinciana, that's 1,300 feet. That's a long
It's a
way.
long.
Okay, that's what I didn't know
I do
was
not support that.
the true distance there either.
Okay, all right, Mr. Jones.
Well, we've gone down this road before when you provided expert guidance on Oxmoor Road. You provided some benchmarks for, okay, well, this is where a light needs to be, and these intersections don't need a light, and it would have made traffic flow so much more, but as everybody will remember who was on the council at that time, we didn't take your recommendation. We didn't do anything. We kept every intersection because people who lived at that particular intersection said, I can't live without this light. You remember that, Mr. McCluskey. It would have really improved things. And I can just tell you from experience, if we put the stop sign in, we will never take out any other. We might as well, I don't want to waste city funds looking at a traffic study if we're going to put the stop sign in, because we'll never take out another one. But what I'm asking for is to look at it and then come up with a determination of where the stop signs need to be. And if they need to be at all three, then tell us that. But if it's better just to have two, then let's look at that. But I just disagree with just going ahead and putting this in and then looking at a study, because we're not going to, we've got to position it with the residents that this is the best way to have flow and to have safety at the same time. So that's just my view of it. I'm sure I'm in the minority, but just that's how it's been. And Mr. Harden, we put in a lot of stop signs on hills that were pitched up so high that you can't stop and then go again.
Okay, all right, I know there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of talk tonight. What is the will of the committee? If there is one, or if you want Mr. Bailey to look at the entire street, how quickly could you do that, Mr. Bailey, if? I see that. I can see you grinning through the mask.
And you
Yeah,
get to sit through
I
another
sure can.
public safety committee meeting.
Yeah.
Another Monday.
I have a curfew, by the way. I don't know. Can I get back to you? I mean, we need to figure out what the scope of that study looks like.
In the meantime, can we not?
Yes, Mr. Gwaltney.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Spoke without being
No.
recognized. In the meantime, could we not safely put in the crosswalks to at least address some of the concerns and give a visual indicator to cars driving through that area? I mean, because I think everybody can agree crosswalks are.
Yeah, and I think I
amenable.
hopefully started
Good idea.
off tonight.
And then you can that'll give us
recommending
one
that
step.
be done regardless.
Okay, can I make a proposal? I've got a proposal. I'm ready. Okay.
You are on this committee, so yes, you certainly can.
Okay. I need to say that I do have emails in my inbox from people who are opposed to the stop sign, so I want to make sure their voice is heard. The number far outweighs, the proponents of a stop sign far outweigh the number of opponents, but I do have numbers like Chad and Joe Wilson and Jeff Underwood, and then I've got another one sitting in my inbox too. Okay. I came here tonight thinking, after our conversation today, that I was not in favor of the stop sign. We were going to do these other measures. I now have come to the same place that Mr. Wright has, which is I think it needs a stop sign. I hear what everyone's saying. So this is what I would like to propose. A few things to address the intersection immediately, and then an immediate study as soon as you can do that, and we need to figure out how to pay you. But I would like to see increased patrolling. So I will take that up with Chief Ross tomorrow, but I'll mention that to him. But I would like to see increased patrolling. I want to see a crosswalk with a pylon. I would like to know, can we grade La Prado with in the asphalt where you have the
The abrasive treatment.
Yeah. I'd like that done. Can we do that immediately?
Okay.
I think I had 4. So there's a crosswalk with a pylon. Clark, we talked about those lights today, but you said you did not want those there at that intersection. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the RRFB that we discussed, it's like push button activated.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated implementation at an intersection. It's more intended for like a mid-block.
Like a mid-block crossing, okay.
Is that
Should we
the
do that
same
at the
thing
school,
as
though?
on Raleigh?
But that's something that could be explored for that crossing at the school.
Okay, can we get pricing on that? Is that something you would talk to Randy
Yeah, I
about, or
can
should I talk
send
to
you a
Randy about that? Okay, so I want grading on the asphalt on La Prado, a crosswalk with the pylon, a study done, and increased patrolling. That's my proposal.
Okay. That is a motion from Counselor Andrus. A very long motion from Counselor Andrus.
Not yet.
Correct.
But we're studying it. We're studying it now.
Do I have
starting
a
right now.
second for the 4-part motion? Second from Mr. Wyatt. Yes, Mr. Higginbot, that's fine.
I do not serve on the committee, but I just want to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Speaking to one of the 4 parts in the motion, which was, we discussed the same intersection, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Last summer.
And we talked about the
Grading on the asphalt.
grading of the asphalt. Why did we not do that at that time?
He had a
He's all the way in the
too.
back hiding.
Now,
I
Mr.
see him.
Squires.
I remember us discussing it, but I just don't remember the reason why we opted not to do it. And it may have been just, we just said, I don't know. I just, before you guys vote on it, I thought maybe we
Sure.
should at least visit why that was.
Because I said, I don't want that. No, I don't. No, I do want that. I'm now saying it. And I am also going on the record that I do want to stop sign there, but I will wait until you come back with your study of the holistic view of Hollywood Boulevard. But, so I'm on the record as wanting one. In the meantime, let's do this and then move forward with the study.
Was it that the grading could not be done on,
There's Berkeley.
The grading can be done, but as time wears on, that grading is gonna deteriorate because you cut into the base.
yeah.
And, I mean, you're gonna create a bigger issue than what you started with. So, I mean, you can grade it down all you want to, but you gotta remember that stuff over a period of time between the weather, vehicles and all that coming on.
What do they do at the high school though?
It's gonna deteriorate. Well, they ended up coming back and paving back over. It's starting to deteriorate the problem. Okay.
Yeah, I don't recommend cutting as much as, there's like surface treatment.
Right. So whatever
to
you
put on
recommend
top
for
with an
gripping.
abrasive, yeah.
Okay.
Instead of cutting into the street, you're
Yeah,
talking
no,
about additional,
That just makes,
okay,
that cuts into his paving.
okay, gotcha. Well, thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Wyatt was the second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 4-0.
Can we do the table?
Okay. That was a long one. No, it is not. You're safe, Mr. Wright. You're safe. Okay, moving on to 160920, request for consideration of a crosswalk over Broadway from alleyway to Shades Road for school traffic. Councilors Jones and myself. I did talk with Randy Hambley today, and he has some ideas that he's thinking of, but he's got to make sure that there's enough sight distance and things that we can do that with. But essentially, if you'll, and I'll be really quick on this because I know we're running out of time, but if the alleyway that comes out right in front of Shades Road that connects like Woodland, so where all the Woodland people come from, and they go to the back entrance of Edgewood instead of going to the front entrance, there are a lot of people that cross right there, and I think there's a way for us to be able to get those kids and families across safely. So we'll look at that. So we'll carry that over without objection. 230920, request to restrict parking at City Hall Plaza. Councilor Andy Gwaltney.
Yes, so while I was not here when Soho was built, I do not believe that the plaza was meant to be used as parking as it's currently being used. This request stems from that being an issue, but also from the concern, bless you, the concern about pedestrian safety, children that are playing out there. We have two anchor restaurants that sit on both sides of the plaza. Children that run frequently from, restaurant A to the fountain, restaurant B to the fountain, and go back and forth. I've sat at both restaurants and witnessed children, within an uncomfortable proximity to vehicles coming into the plaza, not paying attention, being on their cell phones. My proposal would be that we go back to what used to be, which was that the plaza stayed restricted with either chains or some sort of removable bollard device that HFD can remove as needed to get back in and get to their rigger positions. So that's it in a nutshell.
So you're saying no vehicular traffic?
No vehicular traffic. This will also line up to in future projects, since we have an item on in the preliminary design phase to green the plaza. This will line up to help reduce the traffic volume, and it'll be a more natural progression toward that greening one day.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gwaltney. Committee. Well, anybody on the committee, real quick?
Kids playing are also complaining that you have to live
I think we talked last week about there's a spot where they can pull up with a curb cut.
Well, what they mentioned, putting the bollards back a little bit further towards City Hall to where there's still room. But do they sit back? Okay.
So far you can push them back because they can't be in the depth.
Sure, correct. Mr. Jones.
Well, I was, in our last committee meeting, when I was talking about it, I wanted to see if we could figure out how to utilize the park where it's legal. My issue is just in front, that we need to restrict it, but if there's a way we need more parking. I mean, I know we're getting more parking in different places, but if there's a way that we could just set up some parallel parking or something on the sides, but I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the our only solution, is just to restrict parking completely, but I just want to utilize what we have if we can. Or either, pick up like, what you're talking about, 10 15-minute parking like we have somewhere, where you're just gonna go run in and pick it up as opposed to having parking deck and all that kind of stuff. So just some kind of compromise where we're utilizing it, but we have places where it's designated. Right now, it's just a free-for-all. Sure.
Mr. White. So, and I appreciate what Mr. Jones is saying. My thought about it is more in line with what Mr. Gwaltney has proposed. If that's going to be a plaza, whether it's concrete or green or whatever, and we want it to be a plaza and a gathering spot and sort of a central part of downtown, it can't have traffic flowing through it, in my mind. It's got to be, if we're going to have a place where kids can go and run and play, whether it's in the fountain or on a green space or whatever, we just can't have cars going through there, in my mind. So, and I think that is the design of the space. That's what I want the space to be. And so, from my perspective, just eliminate, rather than trying to figure out who can and can't park there and when they can and can't, just eliminate parking there, make sure that the fire trucks can get in and do what they want, and quite frankly, park where they need to park without vehicles being on those X's, and you know, utilize that space more as a gathering, a central gathering spot for the city. Seems to be the reason that it's there and the priority for it being there. So I would be supportive of just eliminating parking, and you know, if we need to figure out something for the restaurants, then we'll try to figure it out. But let's utilize that space for what it's supposed to be.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Jones.
You all have voted on this way, not
That's rare.
Job well done.
Looks like that. Designate pickup or like drop off or something, maybe right in front. Because right now, there's really not anything, it's just, but if we could, put something there where people, you know, could park for 15 minutes right in front, not in the.
Sure, I think that's worth looking at and seeing what we can do with that.
If we could look at that, I think that would be the solution to the problem.
Mr. Gwaltney.
I agree with Councilor Jones. I think in today's current state of affairs and however long we have to endure this nonsense, we're going to have the to-go economy, which means that's important. I think what we need to do is looking at the two entrances from either a street view or satellite view. It appears that you've got 8 to 10 feet where you could probably hatch that area and say loading zone or pickup zone, so it gives someone a visual indicator. Because I think the way it's set up today, the bollards are back actually into the concrete area behind the edge of the sidewalk, so it doesn't impede the flow there. So I think the chain, I think it was a chain before between two bollards.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Okay.
Get Greg to check it out and confirm that for us.
Okay. Does anybody in the audience want to speak to this item?
I have one more.
Ms. Andrus, Councilor Andrus.
And when we do that, I would love to do the same sort of signage that we've been doing throughout downtown with the same logo, with the, you know, the street lamps, everything matches. We'll get Brian to make a nice sign for us to match everything that's already downtown, so.
Okay. So I'm assuming that you were making a motion when you spoke, Mr. Wyatt.
Absolutely was.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilor Wyatt and a second from Councilor Andrus. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Mr. Wolverton, is that an aye? Okay. All right, I just couldn't hear you. All right, so that passes 4-0. All right, new business, 131020, request to add handicap parking space on 29th Avenue at new angled spaces. Councilor Andrus.
Yes, Keith Strickland, I know you've been here a long time. Keith is the one who did the drawings for the angled parking spaces. Chairman McCluskey and I actually were wondering if it's something maybe we could do parallel on the street, what's the name of that street, 19th Place? Is that 19th Place?
19th Place.
In between Urban and Real and Rosemary, yeah.
You're wondering if what, I'm sorry?
If that would be a place for a handicap space, maybe one of those spaces on the street on 19th Place in between Real and Rosemary and Urban.
Yes, so I revisited the site and walked both sides, and I think I identified at least 4 locations where we could potentially get 88 parking spaces. The challenge with those is it's much more than just a striping effort. We do need ADA compliant ramps, which is why the spaces were not striped before. I need an ADA compliant ramp adjacent to it, which is some concrete work, and it's not as simple as it sounds. So I've identified the locations. I would need to work with Wyatt and Greg to identify how those would be designed. Most likely, we'd be coming out into those islands, those corner islands, similar to what we're doing on 18th Street, if you've noticed that. The ramps we're putting in on 18th Street actually start in the islands and go up to the sidewalk, because your sidewalks are very narrow in this area, and we don't have room to do a ramp and a landing area. So I need to start the ramp in the island and work its way up. Now, I've got some power poles in the way, I've got drainage inlets I've got to consider as well. So if there is a way to fund some concrete work in this area, I can certainly identify the areas where these need to be. I think at a minimum, you want one per side, probably maximum two per side. But I can identify these areas for you, try to come up with some cost, and give you some guidance to make a decision.
Okay. I would certainly, would you be able to provide to us at the next committee meeting?
Which is 30 days, I'm assuming, or is it 2 weeks?
9th.
November 9th?
November the 9th.
Sir, yes.
All right, well, we'd love to see that, and then we can make a decision from there based off that. So if that's okay, we'll carry this over.
Very
Sorry
good.
you had to sit through
That's
all
quite
that
all
for a
right.
carryover.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Hey, Mr. McCluskey.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm thinking on the other two, we'll double check, but I'm thinking that we're going to drop those because we handle them internally with
That's
the police
exactly
department.
what I was going to ask, was could we do that?
Yes, sir, because I think I gave Ms. Smith and Mr. Jones and the residents,
All the
Jimmy King,
information
Officer
they need to
King's
go
the one that
through
handles
the,
that.
yep. Okay. 15-10-20, request to close Valley Place on 1031.
Second.
We have a motion to drop from Counselor Wyatt, second from Counselor Andrus. All in favor, please say aye.
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 It was Wyatt and Anderson? It was Wyatt and Anderson?
Wyatt and Andrus.
Oh, I thought I heard Wilberson over here.
All right, 17-10-20, request to close Oxford Circle on Halloween.
Motion to drop.
Wolverton, Wyatt. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed by the same sign. And that passes 4-0.
Well, we
Sorry
declare-
for
we
the
declare
longest public
history of that.
safety committee meeting ever.